Can I help you, sir?
Just a minute. All right, I think I'm ready.
Yep, go ahead.
I'll take one venti half calf, 1/3 decaf iced ristretto almond milk latte with 2 pumps of vanilla, 1 pump of caramel, 1 pump of toffee nut, 1 pump of raspberry, 1 pump of chai, 1 pump of peppermint, but I want it shaken really well. Make it extra frothy with coconut milk on the top. Give me a drizzle of caramel with a little bit of mocha and some strawberry sauce, a sprinkle of matcha, maybe a little vanilla powder and some chocolate powder to make it aesthetic. And then put it in a double cup. I want a straw, but I don't want a straw hole. So whatever you have to do to tape that over to make it right. And make sure the label doesn't cover the art. I like the art. And one of those pink donuts over there. You got that?
Can I get a name for that order?
Yeah. It's Alts. Alts Anonymous.
Thank you. Next. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, let me get a caramel frappuccino with 3 shots of espresso.
Who does this guy think he is? He thinks he's Alts. Well, if he's Alts, then who am I? Did he just steal my identity? Do I even still have a soul? That son of a bitch. The universe will make him pay. In the land of giants, tall and grand, a stolen identity, a wicked hand. With righteous fury, the giant stirred, crushing deceit with each mighty word. A villain emerged, my trust betrayed, identity stolen, a debt to be paid. A thief who dared to steal my soul shall face the fate that takes its toll. Through winding paths of digital deceit, I'll trace the thief, their steps unseat. In every byte and line of code, I'll mend the wounds this debt I'm owed. With hearts of fire and justice to seek, I tread the path where the vengeance speaks. But hold my heart, for darkness too can twist the just, the good, the true. No more the puppet, no more the pawn. I'll rise again as the light of dawn. With justice as my steadfast guide, I'll triumph over this stolen pride. In shadows deep, where the networks glitch, falling short, for you can't have my identity, bitch. A hostile heart now takes its stand to reclaim what's lost in retribution's hand. Oh, sorry.
Can I get a name for your order?
Kevin.
Hey, Alts, thanks for meeting me up here today to have coffee. I sent you an email earlier today. Did you get it? Did you happen to take a peek at the article I sent you?
Yes, sir, I did. And let me say thanks for getting me, Doc Searls on my radar. That article was a beautiful read, and he has some wonderful insights into identity.
Yeah, Doc Searls is a cool guy. Chief editor for the Linux Journal. He's wrote a few different books, but he's associated with UC Santa Barbara's Center for Information Technology and Society, and also Harvard University's Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. So the guy's
Nice.
got his fingers in like the right pies for the types of discussions that we want to have here. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. He's got his fingers in all the pies in the world.
Yeah, I love that. All the pies in the world. Well, you know, one thing that I pulled out from that article right away is Doc Searls goes, "Hey, identity's personal. Start there. If you're going to have a conversation about identity, just start right there. Identity's personal." What do you think about that?
I mean, that's a great place to start. I agree. Identity is super personal. And I can't tell you how violated I was, even thinking about you using my name to order the most ridiculous coffee order of all time, right? So now that when the girls at the coffee shop and talks to her coworkers about this douchebag alts, like they're going to be thinking of me, and it wasn't me because you just stole my likeness, and I'm still trying to recover from that. Okay.
I know you. I know you were rattled, and judging by honestly the number of ways that you tried to kill me, like the point was well received, taken. I mean, it landed. Let's put it that way.
All right, well, that's good to know. I'm glad it hit home. Okay, because that's serious business. You don't mess around with identity.
No, you definitely don't. However, in that type of scenario, if I'm at the counter, I can pretty much claim that my name is anything. I could have said that I was Bozo the Clown, and
Yeah,
the
that checks out.
barista and the barista isn't gonna, ask for proof, isn't gonna be like, all right, sorry, Bozo, let me see your identification, or I'm not giving you the coffee.
Right, right.
You
Yeah,
know,
no, that's one of the simple forms of the baseline identity and those interactions that don't really require much of anything beyond just a simple name, right?
yeah, man, in the real world, like identity can be really complex. So, if I want to go somewhere and I want to maybe interact with an administrative agency, then yeah, I'm going to have to like reach in my back pocket and be like, yo, here is the Ethelorian's identification card. If I want to order a coffee, I don't have to tell anyone anything that might even resemble the root of my identity. I can say whatever I want. Like I said, I can be Bozo the Clown, and that's a feature, not a bug.
Yeah, that's true. And that's kind of one of the identifiers, kind of the difference between, what's the current state of, that actually kind of leads us into the current state of identity in Web3. And kind of how would you describe, the vast difference between the physical realm and the digital realm at this current date?
Yeah, man. In the physical realm versus the digital realm, digital identities are fluid, right? The more that we interact with these kind of administrative systems that come up with identity, the more that maybe these digital identities get more concrete, like get more locked in. But for right now, in this type of scenario here, I mean, I'm the Ethelorian and you're all anonymous. And these digital identities, we're just claiming them, right? We don't need some type of verifier behind it. They're not really connected to anything, so to speak, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, not yet, right? Because we're still kind of these early stages of what's really possible to build, to build out an online identity, right? I always kind of say the different layers of web one. It's like all you could do was be a consumer, right? You could only just download images or videos or articles and just consume them. And then we got web two, introduced social media, and it's like, okay, now we all have the tools with these platforms. Even though they're still centralized, we actually can create content and help distribute stuff, right? And that's kind of the ethos of web three is, now we get to own this content. And one of the, some of the assets and things that I really, really am excited about owning is my identity, right? But we're still not quite there yet. In the current state of Web3, one term he used in his article was sterile to kind of describe the current state. And that's exactly how I feel about the current state of identity in the form of blockchain. It's a very formulaic phase, of course, because it's only driven by those monetary tools that we talk about so much since the day one of blockchain, right? It's just been monetary tools, whether it's ICOs, or DeFi or NFTs. It's just the same kind of thing. We haven't moved beyond that yet, right? So with that in mind, there's really no rails that you can build any sort of identity on top of, right? So like, how can you really like express yourself formally in that environment like that?
I love that you're scratching the blockchain itch. You're like, here, Ethan,
Just
go
tickle
ahead.
it, tickle it a little bit.
Honestly, so if you're talking about blockchain, then I'm going to lean into this idea right here. Like, blockchain doesn't feel personal in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
Like, yeah, you have control over your keys and you do have your assets. And yeah, that might feel intimate in some way because you are the custodian of those keys, those private keys, and you definitely don't want someone else to get control of them. But really, the representation of your account on a block explorer does feel impersonal, right? It's
Yeah.
pretty sterile. Like, hey, check out my very long Ethereum address that starts with 0x. I really identify with those
Right.
64
Super
characters.
personal that way, right? I really identify with the final letters KJ74. You know, it really hits home for me.
Well, yeah, right. So, like, the essence of identity, again, returning to that idea, Doc Searls is like, hey, identity is personal. Start there. Well, if we're on Ethereum right now or blockchain in general, and I've got 64 letters that start with 0x, like, I'm not really identifying with it. It doesn't feel very personal to me. Like, think about this, Alts. Do you relate more to your house key or your house? Like, which one? If you like, are you like, man, I really honestly feel this deep connection to the key that gets me into my into my
Yeah,
house,
no.
or do you feel connection to the house itself?
I mean, I hope you feel the connection to the house itself, right? Like that's the strategy I think there. But you know, it's interesting because just the idea and concept of a key, like I'm surprised even in the physical realm that we still haven't really evolved to a more digital version, right? Like in the US, like we still have physical wallets. We still have keychains. We still have our car keys, our house keys, a key ring, all this annoying stuff. Like it really should just be a phone at this point. Like, why are we even using anything else? Sidebar, right? Like, it just annoys me still to this day that we have like still such archaic keys.
I take it you're not the chain wallet wearer. You don't just have that chain connecting, you know, from belt loop to pocket. You don't have that going on.
No, because if you want to be stealthy, that's gonna hinder your efforts.
Yeah, right. The little jingle jangle. So, like, in the case of that house, again, it just because this point really kind of hit me earlier, it struck me. We have keys that unlock access to places that we might store things, or, in the case of where you live, it's very personal. You might decorate it with things that make you feel comfortable. Most people, when they return to their house after a long day, are like, ah, thank God I'm home, right? Like, that's the
Yeah.
ideal, unless you got some crazy circumstance to you. So, like, when you return to your blockchain account alts right now on the Ethereum L1, because you and I have been using it for a while now, are you like, oh, thank God I'm back to this 0xBFQZ342789025A1? I'm just obviously fucking naming things, but like,
Wait,
is
is
that
that your key? Did you just give me your access to your house, buddy?
yeah. No, I just gave you the address to my house, right? Because that's all it is. It's just an
Right, right.
address to this location. And like the private key is the thing, like you squirrel away. It's a seed phrase. You don't ever want anyone to get it. I don't really resonate with my private key. I'm actually terrified that I'm going to lose it. And my block
Right.
in my Etherscan address, I look at it because there's nowhere else for me to look. I don't know about you, but I used to use Zerion or Zapperfy to really check as like to get a better accounting of like what is connected to this profile. But that's because it wasn't a profile. Like, I had to create a profile in this asset like aggregator, this third party system, in order to figure out what this key could actually sign for. It
Right.
was a weird circumstance, and it's never sat right with me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that resonates with me totally. Like, just the whole process is just it's not that's one of the main things like with the UX just in general, right? Is it's been hindering mass adoption because it's impersonal, it's convoluted, it's complicated, and you know, it's dangerous, right? If you don't know what you're doing, you can lose access to your stuff or get hacked or whatever. It's just, it comes with a host of issues, building out your house on something so fragile.
Yeah, just like not quicksand, like, because that would be like a terrible analogy. That's not what it's meant. It's more like single point of failure, right? Like that's the
Right.
problem. It's a single point of failure. You lose the key, there's no coming back from it. Like there's no one who's going to bail you out. And anytime someone tries to develop a system that might potentially bail you out in the event of something really going catastrophic, everybody goes ape shit. And if you need an example, see Ledger, right?
Right. But I mean, I feel that too, right? Because what we want is decentralization, right? So if you come up with these novel new ways to kind of, you know, take care of those keys for somebody, like people that are in this space for decentralization are just going to lose their shit. Right? Of course you had to see that coming. Now if you're an institution and you might have insurance or something, it's like it's a completely different scenario, right? But for the average user that has already moved beyond, and taking control to house their own keys and control their own stuff and safeguard that themselves, yeah, they don't want to hear that at all. you know
No, because those people have normalized this idea that somehow, like they've grown accustomed to thinking of the key as the most important aspect of their interactions with the greater web as it expands out into this new, I guess, iteration with Web3, right? To throw the
Right.
buzzword out there, right? They literally think of the key as their account. And because of that, by proxy, the focus becomes security. Like security is the only thing people worry about, right? Like, oh my God, what's this next scam coming to get me? And that
Right.
really makes it hard to move to more progressive applications for blockchain, because if you're always worried about like these base needs, like again, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but in some weird way applied out into this blockchain world, right? Like if I'm worried about how I'm going to survive today to make it to tomorrow, then I'm not thinking about how I'm going to plan for tomorrow to lead into the day after tomorrow, right? So if we're only concerned about what are we doing with this private key, I literally, my whole quote unquote identity is built around this seed phrase and never
Right.
losing it, then I can't think about how to extend any application, any type of future use case out beyond just like, is my private key safe? Is my private key safe? Is my private key safe? Right? It's the old, like,
Right.
I walk around all day long. I'm like, wallet, cell phone keys, wallet, cell phone keys,
Right. Yeah.
wallet,
Yeah.
cell phone
No,
keys,
it's
you know?
exactly, that's the blockchain equivalent, right? Wallet, wallet, wallet. Like keys, keys, keys. And you just like but it's it because that's everybody's, biggest nightmare in this space is to lose access to, to get hacked or whatever, right? And I think that's like, if we kind of move the conversation towards Luxo a bit and kind of what they're hoping to do to help with that UX, like I think that's where ERC725, the identity standard and LSPs on the LUKSO network come into play. Like the concept of finally moving away from the concept of just a wallet, run by a private key, and embracing a universal profile instead that would allow you to just build everything on top, including, those monetary instruments that we talk about, but also like social media, while it remains decentralized, so you can own your stuff, right? Security gets better. Your creations, you get to own them, your identity, you can build reputation, the level of provenance for your digital goods and your digital stuff like just goes exponentially higher. The utility, just you can stack it on, right? And while remaining interoperable and upgradable and sustainable moving forward, like that's just it opens up an entire new portal to this new creative economy. And that's how you entice people, I think, to come in and create an online identity, one that they can actually own and actually care about. I think that's one of the big things that the space is lacking, right? Is that personalization of actually being a real part of the space.
Yeah, I like that. If you want to truly engage in this space, I think you and I are examples of people who have adopted a digital identity. I know
Mhm.
you've talked before. I think it's called the Proteus effect, right? Where in some ways, I think when I think of alts, even though outside of this digital realm. I've met you in the physical realm. I think of you more as that avatar with breezy green eyes and deity arms than I do of your physical incarnation, right? Um, in that same way, I guess there are lots of people who hold assets. Just looking at us right now, we're clones, right? There are lots of clone holders, but all of those clone holders, if they weren't attached to a social media account like an X account, I would have no way to connect with those clone holders because there's no profile associated with it. They're literally
Right.
just token. It's you have your public address where a claim on some token registry exists that you're able to take your private key and sign for to move it. Like beyond that, there's really nothing else there. It's super limiting. In the Ethereum white paper, Ethereum list Vitalik had a lot of potential for smart contract platforms. And the Ethereum white paper lists various use cases. And it starts like the first use case that it lists is token systems. And we know that Fabian Vogelsteller, like he was part of the ERC20, right? Like he in that conversation early on, like he authored that standard that has kind of created the baseline for token systems. After token systems in the white paper, we had financial derivatives and like stable assets. So like stable coins.
Yep.
It was only the third use case that's specced out is identity and reputation systems. And then there are others that follow. But the reason that we haven't got to identity and reputation systems yet is because we lacked what you alluded to before, which is an identity standard that is flexible enough, that is decentralized enough to allow for like a really robust development around not just wallets, not just private keys, but rather profiles, right? So now we have the ERC725 and its evolution, the LSP0 on the Luxo network. And now we have the foundation to move from the tokens and the financial derivatives to an identity layer, which is really interesting because frankly, that identity layer it allows for expansion in all directions at once, where tokens are very single track, right? Like financial instruments are financial instruments, but identity can absolutely play a key role in a financial sector, but it also can play a massive role in so many other areas of people's lives. And until this moment, Ethereum's been really limited in growth in those directions because it lacked the proper infra. Well, now we're sitting at the precipice of a time where this infra is going to be launched really for all of us to use in a decentralized manner where you don't just have a key, instead you have a profile. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, we're at kind of the precipice of that transition, going from wallet to a profile, right? And they actually be able to build things out. And especially like imagine if you have an avatar that's, built on or it launched on a universal profile, you get to do so much more with it, right? It's not just a URL pointing to an image on some site hosted somewhere, right? No, it's like actually more stuff becomes, you can have the ability to put things on chain, right? And that's how you can actually use your interactions to build reputation and identity. And that way just you're rewarded by, being an active, valuable participant in the ecosystem, right? And one of the things you alluded to was the Proteus effect, which that always fascinated me. It's basically kind of when you start to identify with your avatar more and more over time as you use it, and you even begin to kind of act and think like your avatar would. For instance, like if you were using like a big muscle wrestler as your avatar, like you might find yourself becoming, more aggressive when you're interacting with others in a virtual space. So it's kind of, I think, with that in mind, like it's paramount for the user to have full ability to shape their digital identities with the values that they actually care about, right? So kind of in essence, like they should reflect our physical values, in the physical realm, that we can also have multiple digital identities and kind of silo those out for a myriad of different reasons, kind of like what Fabian always says, like, you'll want to have multiple universal profiles, because you're going to have different use cases for each identity, right? But that's kind of a wonderful byproduct about universal profiles that we don't have to, that we necessarily don't really have in the physical realm, right?
Yeah, you give me a lot to think about there. I actually like really appreciate that. I guess in the real world, personal identity can be complex, like
Mhm.
really complex, but it's not broken. Where like I would say right now, there's a certain amount of brokenness to the way that we represent ourselves digitally from
For
a
sure.
digital
Yeah.
perspective, right? Like in the physical realm, like just in that coffee shop scenario, I can run around and I can say anything I want. I could introduce myself as Juan Valdez, like I could, I could literally do whatever I want, and there's no one who's going to call me on it. In the digital realm, we constantly are, I guess, living this very bifurcated existence where if I log into some third party social media or some other website, they require me to put information up that I would not share otherwise, right? Like
Right.
it's very invasive, right? So like it feels broken in that way. Like I just want to interact with my friends online. Why do you need my blood type? Right. Where like if I meet you here in a coffee shop, I don't have to present any identification to come in, sit and talk to you, and we can talk about anything we want.
Not yet.
We
Maybe someday
Yeah,
it'll get
right.
super dystopian, right? But
I mean, that's that idea of sovereignty, that ability to be self-deterministic with the choices that we make. When we can bring that type of sovereignty to our digital realms, like you said, we could have an identity, I guess, in the context of universal profiles. I could have an identity that is purely for social use cases. Well, that identity is not going to build up any reputation around financial use cases. So maybe that would not be the identity that I would go and get a loan, right? I would not
yeah.
engage in that type of circumstance with, or that type of event with that identity. But that identity might be very valuable from an influencer standpoint, for some product or service, like who knows? Where I can also have an identity that more accurate, like it reflects more of my physical existence, and that's where all my financial transactions are, and there's going to be a lot of reputation built around that. That
Yeah.
allows the sovereignty of the individual. The individual can make their own choice with how they choose to represent themselves in this digital realm. We don't get those choices right now, and that's kind of painful, right? And if you're a person like me, which I think you are, you're very careful with the products and services that you sign up for. Like I don't sign up for rewards programs because no, you don't need to know what groceries that I buy. Like that's not what I don't want you to know that.
Yeah, no, I identify with that, exactly. I'm the same way as well. That's kind of the beauty of Web3, right? Is like, I mean, at least like kind of where we're headed with Web3, right? Like we get to reshape these interactions. Like instead of being relegated to like only a consumer, right? We get to be an owner and kind of have a direct line to the brands and projects that, the platforms that we choose to interact with, right? It's like we said, we're very selective about which ones. So it's even more meaningful to us, right? What it allows us is to kind of curate our digital lives, even more so than our physical ones in some regards, right? And if you think about that, you extrapolate that out with where this is all kind of headed, I think you get to a really, really nice place. Like, I think once this ecosystem of, Web3 identities grows, through universal profiles and reaches kind of more of a network effect, and you kind of see it, just expand, you're going to see the average person being able to come in and enjoy the space a lot more in a fashion that they're used to, using the same sort of platforms. You just call it, for instance, like social media, right? Like, but imagine an actual like decentralized version of that, right? That's even more transparent and even more trusted than the current centralized platforms they're used to now. I think that's just going to kind of open the floodgates, for people to come in and realize that they can, in fact, actually build and own a digital identity, and like they've never been able to before.
Interesting that you say own a digital identity, right? Because with, to me, when I hear you say that, it sounds like you're giving the permission, or like somewhere in there, I'm trying to articulate this thought, like
Mhm.
maybe the digital identity that you choose to invest in doesn't actually reflect other identities that you invest in as well. Like your digital presence could be totally different than
Right.
another digital presence that you have. And I know like that comes up in conversation with us a lot, but it's also, I think, a really important sovereign discussion to have, because the digital world, there needs to be like some type of rebalancing of power, right? Because right now, I am just a user of most platforms. I don't own anything about what I do on those platforms. In fact, if I interact with the platform is the harvesting my information.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like when I walk down the street, I don't have to tell anyone about the donut that I want to eat, right? Like I can just like grab the donut and eat the donut. I don't have to produce documentation. That's like actually a really funny Mitch Hedberg skit. One of his bits. I don't know if you like Mitch Hedberg. The person at the counter is like, "You want a receipt for that donut?" And Mitch is like, "No, I don't. I can't conceive of a time that I would have to prove this transaction to anyone." And uh, again, returning to that idea of sovereignty, we human beings crave that self-determinism, right? We
Yeah.
crave this opportunity to kind of move through our lives and expose as much of ourselves as makes us comfortable, but have some personal privacy in domains that we really don't want to share, right? It's kind of like if you're a chubby kid, you don't want to take your shirt off at the beach, right? I lived that one when I was younger. Like I have the right not to take my shirt off. Where I guess right now, using that analogy, if I want to interact with Facebook, I'm going shirtless, pantless, and with no
Yeah.
underwear.
You're buck naked if you're rolling into Facebook. They got you, right? They give you like a party hat or something.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Like identity is all on the side of the administrative system that I'm interacting with. Like they are telling me what I need to put in so they can establish the profile that is going to be connected with my user account. And they could put any one of the fields as the asterisk field. That's not optional, it's mandatory. They're collecting that information about me. That's not fair to me. That's again, as an individual, as a human being, I don't want that. I want to be able to like, yeah, I want to use your platform. I'm a human. I should be able to prove my humanness without giving you my social security number.
Well, I think it's very unbalanced in that regard, the way you're describing it there. It should be more sovereign, right? Like it's our identities. Like, why should someone else be able to control our identities? It doesn't make any sense, right? I think it's just the natural progression of just the technology didn't allow for it yet, right? Luckily, blockchain showed up, and we have some new tools to play with and kind of build with. I think one thing that kind of a lot of people kind of woke up to with this same sort of concept is central bank digital currencies, right? CBDCs. Like, because you throw out that concept of like, hey, what if the government just makes a CBDC and you have to use it, right? And they can, watch and know everything you do, right? They could say, oh, guess what? Ethelorian, he's already had a steak this week. You can't buy another steak, Eth. Or like you go to the gas pump and they're like, oh, Eth, you already filled up your tank this week. I'm sorry, buddy. You're just going to have to stay home. Like, when you start to describe that sort of like dystopian, control over people's lives, they instantly just want to vomit at the concept of that, right? But it's like that's really like the way our identities are already being manipulated, right, and controlled. They really just haven't woken up to that yet.
Yeah, that's a really great point, right? Like so like our identity right now, uh anytime that we have to really anytime we interact with like this digital realm, we are accessing some central authority that is going to verify the claim that we're making, right? I
Right.
claim that I'm 5'11. Well, the only way that we could verify that would be whip out a measuring tape and measure me, or check my license that says I'm 5'11, right? And all of that information, all of those all of those, I guess, verifiers, they exist on the side of the administrations, the bureaucracies that issue the identifications or really issue those identifiers to you. So like
Right.
think about your wallet right now. You whip your wallet out. You take the cards out from your wallet. All of those things, like all of that information generally is pretty siloed to the organization that issued you whatever piece of like whatever identifier you have. So like you have your license. Well, that's issued to you by the state that you live in, right? And all that information is tracked only in that one very specific database at the RMV. If you're a student though, you have a university, right? And like let's say you go to university. Well, at the university, you might have the bursar's office where you pay your bills, and all your information relative to your bill payment is right there at the university. But then you can like walk down the hall to IT, and they could be on a totally different database with a different identification database system, and they're going to issue you your student ID, which doesn't talk to the bursar's office and definitely doesn't talk to the RMV. And you, as this sovereign individual, is like, where the hell do I exist in all this? I'm just like the endpoint that's got to suffer. And I, I think I probably went off on a little bit of a side tangent here, but like,
Yeah, you feel like you went through that yourself. Are you okay, buddy? Did you get trampled by the institution?
well, you know, like I like institutions. Institutions serve their purpose, but you know, as forward thinking early adopters of Web3, specifically it relates to like Luxo and this kind of soft identity. I love the ability to choose. I
Right.
love the ability to choose what I expose to the outside world. And I also like that that information is kept it like decentrally in a centralized way, if that makes sense. Let's
No,
peel
that
that
makes perfect sense.
that
Yeah,
onion
that's kind
back.
of like the best of both worlds, right? And I think that's the key is that people should yearn to want to take control over those things, right? And it's so sad. Like I was thinking about some of these statistics around this concept, and just like thinking about how many people in the world today like still remain unbanked and without any form of ID in their relative world or their relative countries, right? Like because not everyone's as advanced in those regards, and it's just sad that it's such a big chunk of the population like still remains out of control of those things. And when Fabian said that they, wanted to create universal profiles as a common good and just kind of release that out into the world, like I think the level of good that's going to come from that gesture is just going to be like so massive, if you fast forward several years from now.
Yeah, like billions of people lack official identification. They lack birth certificates. And because of that, they probably lack access to banking. They lack access to credit. They lack all of these things that in the global West we've come accustomed to. In fact, we've become desensitized to the fact that it's readily available to us. But we're talking like half of the global population has no access to this stuff. Now, we could invent bureaucratic systems in their local countries that could issue them these verifiers, or we could maybe look out into a future where this stuff again exists in some new paradigm. So we're not just repeating like
Right.
systems that are super inefficient, right? Like why superimpose if a place has no system, why then like stamp them with problems in an
Right.
antiquated system? Why not build something new? But if we're going to do that, there always has to be that respect for the individual, for the sovereign individual, right? The ability to be self-deterministic about the choices that people make. And you brought up CBDCs, and that was where like my brain fried before. I just like missed it. I kind of went on a tangent. Like that's why there's this global push towards cryptocurrencies specifically. Let's talk about like the king right now, Bitcoin, as a store of value, as this digital gold, because it's permissionless peer-to-peer cash, right? You can spend your Bitcoin however you want. But in the case of a CBDC, can you imagine the circumstance? No, Alt, you already had a cup of coffee today. You can't have two. Like that is not a
No.
future I want to live in. I don't want anyone connected to me living in that future.
Yeah, no, that's not the future that we want to build, right? And it's just so like I mean, I think there's reasons why they don't teach finance and inflation and things like that in school, right? Because they want you just to keep blindly, going down that path. Like, but for those of us who kind of, unplug from the matrix to realize, what's actually happening on the monetary side of things and how we were being taken advantage of, right? I think that, I can't wait for people to kind of realize the same thing about, identity and everything else that we should be fighting for, right? Like more and more people are going to be waking up to these things. And I think it's all headed in the right direction, but you're right. You hit on the point there. It's like, it's really important that we consider these values that that we find in, that we really cherish, right? When we're trying to build our identity, because like whenever we decided to come into this space and just stay here and grow the space and do what we can to help build it out in a positive way, like I think it's really important for everyone to be able to have their own ability, to make their stamp in the way they want to and build their base and their home, their digital house, right? And to be able to grow that in a very, in the way they see fit, right? That's kind of the key. Is decentralization. It's literally just the key to all of this. And that really gets me excited about, where the future's headed and what we can kind of do moving forward.
I'll tell you, the future is definitely up from here. I spent a little time today just poking around in people's universal profiles, and I know that they're L14 profiles and that we will see the launch of universal profiles, like the formal launch, sometime really soon. TM. I'd love to give a date on that, but I can't. But if I was to speculate, maybe mid-September, right? Seems like good
Yeah.
speculation. Um, Poking around with those universal profiles, I was struck that I'm looking at the future. And I know people like you and I have been convicted about this for a couple years now. I would encourage others to go and have that same experience because, you know, you click into these universal profiles and you start looking and you see immediately that these again, these profiles have so much more character than an Etherscan page.
Yeah, I do.
They're
Yeah.
telling a story about whatever the person is or entity is that's connected to this profile. And I think that that is a really powerful thing. Like that moves us closer to this idea that I connect with and resonate with my house more than I do the key to my house. In fact, I don't really think about the key to my house unless I want to go in my house or get out of my house. And we could make that extension. We could actually extend that analogy out pretty far and say,
Yeah.
I've got doors in my house with other keys. Consider those like vaults in my universal profile, right? Like you go
Yeah. Yeah.
wild
Yeah.
with this analogy, but it's really great to see people's digital houses and how they keep them and how they decorate them and the kind of stuff they have inside. And that's like our universal profile. And that experience brings us one step closer to having an identity that is, um, it feels native to this world, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think if you haven't gone and looked at, universal profiles yet, it's such a great time to do it. The L14 versions, right, as we're getting ready to roll into the real thing, because it is kind of the beta, the building blocks, but the writing's on the wall, right? You can see the difference between. I mean, there's a big difference between going to your wallet address on Etherscan and just looking at some data. You know what I mean? Or there's also a big difference between you go to your OpenSea account and it's like profile, and it's like, no, not really. You got to like load a banner, put a couple of links up, but it's like centralized. They could just delete that at any point in time. Like you don't own that stuff, right? Like we saw with Recur, right? You could have an account on there with your NFTs and everything, and then they just like rug the whole platform. You know what I mean? And one of the problems too with building all that stuff on top of just a wallet is like if there's issues, like if for instance if Etherscan or MetaMask or OpenSea, if those platforms go down, like you're just talking about mass chaos. Like because guess what? Wallets can't communicate with each other. They just can't do it. So it would be such a mess, right? But that's one of the beautiful things about universal profiles is they can communicate and they can interact and they can team up and do some really amazing stuff. So I think we're about to take the shackles off of this whole thing. And I can't wait for people to wrap their minds around just the concept of having an account, having a profile, right? And that's what, that's what and I love you to use the word story. Like this is when our story really begins, right? Because everything we've done to this point, I mean, we've been storytellers and stuff really, but it's like that story of itself didn't have its own life, but it's about to get one.
This is why I invited you for a cup of coffee, because I always leave it with plenty of thoughts in my head and a lot to chew on, proverbially. So, we'll have to do this again. Maybe next time you suggest the article, and we'll read it through and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, buddy, I can't wait. I'll be looking forward to the next time. And make sure to next time you order coffee, don't use my name. All right.
I can't promise that.
All right. Well, I can't promise I won't find 20 more ways to kill you then. Till next time.
Till next time, buddy. Cheers.
Cheers.